Thank you. My name is Dave Mossner. I do live here in Verona, and I work at the Oakwood Foundation. I've been a fundraiser there for going on 9 years. It'll be 9 years this summer. We have here's the brief commercial that I'm going to give you today. So you may know we have 2 retirement communities in Madison, one on the west side, not all that far from Westtown on Mineral Point, and another closer to the American Family headquarters on the east side. And between the 2 campuses, we have about 1,000 residents. We have independent living. That's most of our people who are living there. Assisted living, advanced assisted living, rehab. We also have memory care. So we are local, not-for-profit, and faith-based, started in 1948 by 4 Lutheran congregations. And like I said, I've been part of it for a while now, really enjoy it. The pandemic has been a trial, as it has for everybody. We have 96% of our residents are vaccinated and a pretty high number of staff. And we've survived without the horrible news-making outbreaks that unfortunately some places have had. So anyway, onto the lighthouses. On the screen, that is the Mission Point Lighthouse. And this is the only lighthouse that my wife and I have ever lived in. And we'll talk about that experience. I'll show you a number of the lighthouses that I think have some special stories that I think might be of interest and are kind of special to us. And when we looked into living in a lighthouse, and when we told people we were going to live in a lighthouse, the universal reaction was some mix of, oh, that sounds romantic. That sounds fun. Yeah, it was mostly. Some of it was quite interesting. And we'll get into that. So lighthouse history goes back a very long time to as early as the 5th century BC, when there were already ships on the water and they would wreck because they didn't know how to navigate into a port. So the very early days, the early ancestors of the lighthouses, so to speak, would be placing a bonfire on a hill to direct traffic. That transformed into putting the bonfire on top of a pillar. So it's being able to be seen from a long way. The picture on your screen, which is not my picture, is the Tower of Hercules. This has had some work done. It may even be a recreation, but that was built, the initial one anyway, was built in the 2nd century. So this goes back a long way. You may even recall in the Bible, the Apostle Paul being in a shipwreck. So shipwrecks have been with us as long as we've been getting into boats. Now, slightly more current. This is the St. Clair Flats, where the St. Clair River is kind of between Lake Erie and Lake Huron. And so already back in the 19th century, in the early part of that century, ships were navigating, bringing goods or taking wood or other things out of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota back to civilization. Well, this little stretch here where you see these little 2 light towers was so rough and only about 10 feet deep that reports in 1837 were that it sometimes took 2 or 3 weeks to go through this stretch because that's how treacherous it was that you might wreck. And if you wrecked and you put a hole in the side of your boat, you're not going anywhere and all your freight is lost. So being typical government work, we wouldn't be surprised, you might not be surprised, that the 1837 report, it was 1859 before they started building any lights. And so these are remnants of those. They protected traffic on the water until 1934. Then they were replaced by some other navigational aids. And in 1988, locals started doing things to try and keep these from falling completely into the water. From where I stood to get these pictures was at least a half mile. I didn't have any opportunity to get any closer than that. I was frankly relieved to see him looking this good from that distance. The oldest lighthouse in Michigan is the Fort Gratiot light. That's this one. It's the oldest surviving light, but this isn't even the original one. The original one was built in 1825. It wasn't built very well. 2 things. If you were on Lake Huron in a boat, you couldn't see the lighthouse. I think even non-engineers would agree that's not a very good lighthouse design. Secondly, it blew over in a storm in 1829. So they had to rebuild it. They rebuilt it again in 1861, and they put in a third order Fresnel lens into it. We'll talk about the lenses in a minute. It was retired in 2004, renovated in 2012. It sits on an active Coast Guard station. And those apartment buildings you can kind of see across the river there, that's Canada. That's Michigan and Canada get very close along the river there, where it's a river. We're talking a river about the width of the Wisconsin River. Okay, so it looks like any old river other than there's another country. And you can access this. It has been reopened. I'll try and mention as we go along which ones are kind of open to the public and which ones aren't. But like Gresham, most of the lighthouses around Lake Michigan were built most likely in the 19th century. So here's the Fresnel lens. This is one that was in the old Presqu'île, Michigan light when I was there. The lens was built in the 19th century, invented in the 19th century by a Frenchman by the name of Fresnel, Fresnel, and he layered glass on top of each other to create the shapes that help magnify the light. So even a candle, a small flame, was able to be seen for a long distance, depending on how high they put the light in the air. It could be seen 14 miles away on a clear night. What you need to know about Fresnel lenses is probably more than I can tell you. The basics, you have different orders of lights. A number 1 Fresnel is the biggest you would find. A 6th is the smallest Fresnel lens. So this is a number 4. So there would be at least 2 more smaller than what you're seeing there. And this would be, if you took it down, it's probably a good 4 feet from top to bottom. So they're pretty impressive. This seems like a good spot to mention because I found this fascinating. Growing up here in southern Wisconsin, you hear the Chicago fire. If you've had any Wisconsin history, you know about the Peshtigo fire. Well, I learned at this location that there was also a Port Huron fire. All 3 of those fires happened on the very same day in 1871. So the smoke created by all these fires really played into the need for foghorns. And so many of these lighthouses had foghorns built with them. Not many of those survive. So if you get to it, like Wind Point has a fog house, essentially near the lighthouse, where you can see it. It looks like a 1-car garage is how the log house, how that is built, but inside it is where the energy for creating the sound is made. So that pretty much concludes the foghorn portion of the program. So what got us started? It kind of happened because we were vacationing for the first time, amazingly enough, in Door County back in 2013. And I had been taking pictures seriously for a little while and thought, oh, it's nearby. This will be fun. We should go look at it. My wife went inside. I kind of wandered around outside and took pictures. So this was early enough. I wasn't even all that concerned if I got into the tower or not. Now I try and make it a point. So all these have interesting stories. I love it when they have different viewpoints, like Cana did. The water was down at that time, so I could walk all around it. But the stories are interesting. The keeper here was, at one point was a man named Conrad Stram. And in some of the stories on some of the histories of other lights that I've read about, he got around. He was a light keeper at many lights. But in 1917, he wrote a letter to his supervisor, and I think it gives a neat insight to what government bureaucracy was like at that point. Might still be like this. So he had sent to his district inspector that he had a son born. He and his wife had a son. I don't know if it was the first or second or third, but he got this reply. Receipt is hereby acknowledged of your letter October 29th, 1917, reporting a visitor at your station, which is contrary to the instruction contained in District Circular Letter Number 101. You are advised, under the circumstances, the regulations will be waived in your case, and you are authorized to give the visitor a permanent residence. I don't know, that cracks me up. So after Cana, we took the Washington Island Ferry out and we saw the Plum Island Light. And the history, like the lightkeeper stories and learning about how isolated that life had to be, how tough it would be. You could be isolated for a whole winter. Talk about your eternal pandemic. Lighthouse keepers would have been perfectly suited to survive a pandemic. The architecture is interesting. The shapes, the sizes, the science can be interesting. I get excited by how I might be able to take pictures of it. So these are maps from Lighthouse Friends. And as websites go, if you're just looking for information, they group them by states. So you can just search in lighthousefriends.com, you type in Wisconsin on a search bar, and you will see either a map or a list. So you can see there along Wisconsin's East Coast, we have 35 lights on Lake Michigan. There's 6 on Lake Winnebago. In Michigan, which is there on the other side, of course, we've got 9 in the Upper Peninsula along Lake Michigan and 19 on the state's west coast. Not all of these are photographable. Some of them are remains, essentially. If on that Wisconsin side above Green Bay, it refers to the Longtail Point. There's basically ruins left on the island. There's nothing sticking in the air. The Green Bay Harbor Light, you'd need a boat or a plane to see it. This is the Mackinac Straits area. If you go to Mackinac Island, that means you're on a boat. One of the companies that offers a ferry service offers a lighthouse tour where you can spend 6 hours on the boat. You won't see all of these, but you'll see a decent number of them. If you want to see all of them, you probably need to rent your own boat or plane to be able to do that. But just in that area, there's 28 lights close to Mackinac City. And then on the East Coast, on Lake Huron, the Detroit River, and south, there are another 22 lights for a total of 122. So far, other than the Apostle Islands and Superior, we've been to all the Wisconsin lights. We've been to the lights on the east, the west coast of Michigan, and the southern side of the Upper Peninsula, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 105 to 110. Frankly, I haven't counted in a while. So we're still working on it, but it doesn't count the ones you need a boat or a plane, unless I got lucky. And still looking on adding future ones to the mix. So some of them you get to go in. This is one of those. This is in Gulliver, Michigan, which you probably have no idea about Gulliver. I'm guessing Gulliver traveled there, and so it got its name. But the Sol Troy Lighthouse is redone by the Historical Society to look like it did when the lightkeepers were there early in the 20th century. We'll talk about this lighthouse again. But these are the places where you can go in, and if you don't want to pay to see everything, that's fine, but you could see the gift shop, you could talk to the volunteers, which are typically who run the stores, and the fees vary widely, but you get a chance to see it. The fees get you up in the tower if that's something you want to do. If you're able to do that, I always recommend it if that's something you can do. And I was talking to the keepers at various lighthouses that got us interested because we realized that most of the volunteers were close to us in age, seemed to have similar interests, and they said, yeah, this was pretty fun stuff. So this is the Mission Point Lighthouse, and there on the right, that's the map. That's the location of it where that red flag is, north of Traverse City. We looked into it. We got back home after our vacation, and we did an internet search on lighthouse keeping volunteers. Lighthouse volunteers, lighthouse keeper volunteers, Great Lakes. And there are roughly, I want to say about a dozen places. There are some that are pretty Spartan. They're one of the Apostle Islands. They drop you off by a boat. You have one electrical outlet. They pick you up at the end of the week. That's not who my wife and I are. We are not that level of campers. Bless you if you are. Frankly, we would like to be on shore. So if we forgot something or got bored and we didn't have to work, we could go elsewhere during our week. So Mission Point checked all those boxes for us. And as we found out later, as lighthouse gigs go, this is about as posh as it gets in terms of being comfortable. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. All right. So we signed up, we were accepted. There was a fairly long application process, and we paid $200 as a gift to the township who owns the lighthouse and uses that for work. And if you're looking at this, one of the keys you want to look at is what comes with the gig. If you're going to sign up to be a lighthouse keeper, what's on the list? Well, on the list, one of the things that caught my eye is it said light housekeeping. Not necessarily light housekeeping, but light housekeeping. And I suspect if the four of us were going to discuss what light housekeeping means to you, we might all have slightly different answers. I would contend that my idea of light housekeeping was not what the managers of Mission Point thought of as light housekeeping, because if we kept our house this clean, you could do surgery on the living room floor. So we aren't quite there. But more details on that in a couple of minutes. But still, in comparison to the actual real hard bit light keepers of days gone by, we had it easy. This is at St. Joseph, Michigan. These are range lights. You've got the main one, you've got the one at the end of the pier, the pierhead light, and the catwalks add a lot to photographs. However, it may surprise you, they didn't build those catwalks for photographs. They built them because sometimes the waves were so high, you needed to walk along the top of that to stay dry as you brought goods or fuel or whatever it was back to the lighthouse. So it gives you an idea on the kind of weather you might confront. And occasionally, some of the light keepers were actually blown off the catwalk. I have an interesting view later of a catwalk we'll show you. When Mission Point first opened, they used whale oil to fuel the lamps. As technology progressed, they went from candles or wicks fueled with something, from whale oil, then to kerosene. When they got to kerosene's a lot more flammable than whale oil. So the government said, you have to build a separate place to store your kerosene. So if it blows up, we don't lose the tower and the lighthouse. We've just blown up the little storage building. And that's what that brick structure is. They're probably 10 to 15 yards from the back door of our place of where we live, sorry. On the right, those are the final steps up into the lantern. The other steps up to this point are normal stairway steps. This is close to going up a ladder in terms of how steep those are. So we're all set, we're getting ready to go. And part of our job didn't include tours, but we were expected to know the history. So we read about the history before we went up, read about the area, how Europeans got to that part of Michigan, because they sailed in, they didn't come up from the mainland. And we paid that $200 I mentioned. And at the time I thought, well, that's not bad for 7 nights of lodging, because we got to stay there for those 7 days. But prior to going, this is my wife, Rhonda. We're at the Grand Traverse Pie Shop the night before we move in, and we're boning up on the history to make sure we know what we need to know for the tours. If you find State Highway 37 in Michigan, if you go north, it ends where the Mission Point Lighthouse is. So that's very simple directions. I would describe the peninsula north of Traverse City to be similar to Door County, much thinner. There's orchards, there's apple orchards, there's cherry orchards, there's a lot of vineyards. So it's a gorgeous area. Fair number, there's some farms yet, kind of getting replaced by some very, very nice homes, as you might imagine. We moved in Tuesday, September 17th in 2019. We unloaded our groceries, our bedding, clothes, other supplies for the week. We met up with the manager and she began our training about 11 in that morning. And she took us through the work day, which was selling stuff in the gift shop, selling the passes for the tower, telling us kind of the things we needed to do and not do. And at the end of the day, she worked with Rhonda in cashing out the drawer and told me and showed me what I needed to do as far as the rest of the building. So by the time night came, we were tired, exhausted. Because after that training and all that work, we closed at 5 and then we had to clean and count the drawers and everything, which took on average, I think we got it down to be an hour by the end, but it was taking a good hour and a half to 2 hours at the start. One of the key benefits of a place like living in a lighthouse is, and this was September, is we were able to open our window and hear the water hitting the shore. And it's virtually black. There's no other light pollution. There aren't many sounds because there is no highways or other of that extraneous sound. So you hear nature surrounding you. That's pretty cool. So that light housekeeping part. The part for me that wasn't light housekeeping was the sand. In the morning and at the end of the day, you're sweeping sand off the boardwalk that surrounded the lighthouse, the steps down to the beach, which was probably really stupid. What good is that going to do? And of course, we had to sweep the inside of the lighthouse every night when we closed down for business. And it's a Sisyphean task. It's never done. You can do it. We got to the point we were sweeping inside the house about every 2 hours, just trying to be safe, make sure the guests weren't going to hurt themselves or anything. But sand blew in or came in on the feet of guests all day long. In addition, we had to do the windows. So 17 windows, that's me up in the lantern. The lantern is the area around the actual light. And one night, I actually crawled out a fairly small hole, big enough I could get through it, and washed the outside of the windows because those black spots on that window were on the exterior. Little flying insects being caught in cobwebs, and it was driving me nuts. So I got out there and I wiped down the outside of the lantern. I do not do windows here at home. Big surprise, right? Our main job, our first task was welcoming people to the lighthouse. You walked in, we were saying, welcome to the lighthouse to everybody. And then the second job, we ran the gift shop. And to give you an idea, so this is September, pretty prime travel time. A person walked in our front door every 90 seconds that we were there and open for business. More than 1,500 visitors, an average of 250 a day. On Saturday, over 360 people stopped by. Those were the people who signed the book. There were others that came and went that didn't sign our book, but that was one of our jobs, is trying to get them to sign the book. The biggest seller were the magnets. Some people would spend a couple $100 on souvenirs. We spent a couple $100 on souvenirs, but we got a Lightkeeper discount, so that really helped. One of the days it rained, so the sand wasn't an issue, but the original wood floors got pretty slippery if there was water on them. So we were mopping almost any time guests came in and out, which was not as many on a rainy day. Your tourism is really effective. If it's not a great day, people aren't going to the beach so much. All right, so here's where we lived. That gift shop is just the other side to the left of the look at the living room there. And this is the living room. This is looking toward the dining room. And you can see on the right there, that's the TV. And if you could see left of that, that's where the door is into the gift shop. We had some inventory stored in there, but this was a comfortable place. We had cable TV. We had Wi-Fi. We had air conditioning. Not that we needed it. There was heat if we needed it. It was not roughing it. This was our kitchen. The little door, the thing tilted up that you see, the lid, that is how you get to the basement, which was one of the fascinating things to me. They built this place in 1869 without a basement. 10 years later, they added it. So they dug under an existing house, and that basement today, I'm 5'10". I had to duck down there. It was a very small ceiling, but I can imagine if you're digging under an existing structure, and people weren't tall then. And the reason we had to get down there is that's where some of the inventory was kept. Because at least this lighthouse, they ordered all their souvenirs at the beginning of the season, and we were at the tail end of the season. So we were selling out of stuff by then. And there's the dining room. You can see our computers on the table. We had connection to the outside world with Wi-Fi, and that was wonderful. There's our bedroom. The window's open. You can that's the fence, not the lake that you see behind the trees. And a nice full bath with a washer and dryer. That was handy because we worked hard enough. We ended up showering a couple times a day. So back to the public side. This was still part of the free part of the visit. The keeper's office. Part of the job for the early keepers was also counting the ships that went past. Doesn't that sound like fun? Day after day after day. At the beginning of this lighthouse's tenure, there were more sail ships than steamships, but that quickly changed, and steamships became the rule of the day. Most of the lumber, virgin trees for people building in Detroit and Ohio. That map they put together every year representing visitors from the prior year. Germany is the #1 foreign country sending visitors to Michigan. You may know, it kind of affected me because my family's ancestors settled in Frankenmuth, Michigan. So there's a lot of Germans that settled in Michigan, which is why to this day they continue to travel to Michigan in big numbers. Canada's #2. We met guests while we were there from France, Colombia, South Africa, just to name a few. And we got to have some pretty nice conversations with all these people. If you like people and interacting, that would help a great deal. But that was one of the fascinating parts. Just having those, when you were not so busy, you couldn't have a conversation. That was really fun. Upstairs, and you can see the little notes on the steps. Have you paid? Have you paid? Because at Mission Point in 2019, you had to pay $4 to go up to the lighthouse or go up to the second floor to see the museum, which had a 5th order Fresnel lens, which is what Mission Point would have had. And it had some history. It had some of the relics that were found or washed up on shore from different wrecks along the years. And $4 is about a right price. It was good information, but you weren't going to spend even a half day there as a visit. This part of the lighthouse was also on the second floor, kind of a recreation of the quarters where the people lived. And it focused on Sarah Lane. And there are a lot of women in history who kept lights. The ironic, sad, funny, depending on what part of the story you're in, is probably similar to Sarah. She and her husband moved in 1881, and he was the longtime keeper. And he resigned for health reasons in 1906. She was allowed to take over that next year. She retired in 1907 at age 65, which was a lot older being 65 in 1907 than I would say being a 65-year-old is today. But it's not like she only served a year because her husband was sick for 8 years before he died, and she was doing all the work. But women weren't hired for this job because they weren't, able to handle the load. So there's a lot of stories of wives who did the work, raised the kids, and took care of their sick husband. So fascinating and interesting, and you can just imagine the solitary confinement aspect to it. The humorous part to me, and I think this is because of how I view history. I mean, we all view history from our own perspective of where we live. You notice the fence in a couple of photos around the lighthouse. They built the fence in 1901 to keep tourists out because people already in 1901 were flocking there on nice weekends to see, and it was a working lighthouse. They didn't have time to be bothered by these people, and they certainly didn't have a gift shop in 1901. But it never occurred to me that you would have had tourists in 1901. I don't know. I don't know why I didn't think that, but just came as a surprise. So here's a view from the lantern. The light's been long since gone from Mission Point. It sat empty for about 40 years before locals got the money together and bought the land, and now it's surrounded by Township Park, and it's just perfect. When this was a lighthouse, there wasn't a forest around it. There's a forest around it now, so it looks differently. But on one of the nights when I crawled upstairs, I turned off all the lights, I saw more stars in the heavens than I've ever seen. It was magnificent. I did one of the things, you notice the picture at the beginning where you see the lantern glowing? That's because I took a desk lamp and about 100 feet of electrical cord and put a light on the floor of the lantern to create the effect of it being lit at night. And you'll see that shot, I think, one more time here coming up. But this could probably hold about 6 people, and you could look in all directions. And if you go to especially if you go to this lighthouse, if you're at all able, you need to get to the top. It's only 37 steps. I'd be willing to bet a decent amount of money you won't find any shorter lighthouse anyplace. So we always encourage people, if you can, you should do it because it's not going to be easier at the next one. All right, a couple other things. You notice in the picture on the right, you can see the 2 windows on that side. That's the private quarters. That's where we were living. So the public was essentially walled off from that second window roughly to the roof, and that was the public part of the facility. In the upper left, that is the current Mission Point light. It's about 2 miles offshore. The first version of it was built in 1938, and the water here is very shallow. That's why this place had to be built in the first place, to direct ships either left down the bay or right down the bay, depending on which side they were going, if they were going to Traverse City or not. Even now, when it was cool, but I was only going to get this opportunity once. So I waded out into the water to get the shot like you see lower left there. And I was able to walk out a long way before it even got over my knees. So it was very nice. I saved an old pair of tennis shoes just for that purpose because I wasn't walking out there barefoot. Although you could have, it was beautiful sand. So that's the Lightkeeper experience. I could regale you with tales for a while yet, but that gives you an idea of what the experience was like. So I want to share a couple other stories. After we spent our week at Mission Point, we spent the rest of the following week, because we worked Tuesday until Tuesday noon to Tuesday noon. So we headed east across the state and made our way down the East Coast. And the second on the light I'm sharing with you because this is important and means a lot to me because most people can't see this light. It's on Dow Chemical property, surrounded by more Dow Chemical property. They have worked with the local Marine Historical Society in allowing it to be restored. And it's actually even open to the public a weekend or two a year. And I called the Historical Society, explained who I was, said, I'm trying to collect lighthouses. Is there any way, what do I have to do just to get a glimpse of it that I could take a picture? Because you could not see it otherwise unless you had a boat. Well, they said, well, you have to be a member. If you're a member, we can show it to you. Okay, so I paid the $15 and I became a member. And one of the members of the board met me at a 7-Eleven gas station. I had got in his car. We drove about a mile. He unlocked a chained gate, drove another 1/8 of a mile. Still couldn't see the lighthouse yet because the seagrass was 10, 12 feet high, and finally made the turn down a road. He spent an hour with me. He showed me inside the lighthouse. We got to climb up onto the second level. It's early restoration time. The photo on the right I only took because he suggested that I might be interested in that shot, which I wouldn't have noticed myself originally. It was a wonderful experience and a real treat to have that opportunity. And he obviously does this and did it for other people. It wasn't like I was that special. But if you see something like that, it's worth a call to see if they'll do something like that. This light was built in the 19th century. At that time, there was talk of making the Saginaw River into a canal across the state of Michigan. That didn't happen, but even now it's a major sea fishing or cargo port with big ships going in and out. This was part of a range light system, so there would have been another light in front of it so the captain could line up the lights so they'd be on top of each other. And if he saw it that way, he knew he was on the straight line. Point aux Barques is a little further down the coast. Point aux Barques means point of boats. And it's the first one that really told ships northbound where to make the turn into Saginaw Bay. This light also had a life-saving station with it, where essentially you had Coast Guards and lifeguards there. In 1913, they saved 33 people who had, when their ship drove aground. So those are some more fascinating stories. The locals pronounce Presque Isle, Presqu'Isle. So Old Presqu'Isle is the old light built in 1840. Built out of stone and cement. It's still a cement staircase. I was able to go up there. I showed you the old Fresnel lens earlier. It was replaced 30 years later. The house was lost, but they've rebuilt it true to the original on the actual foundation of the old one. So this is open to the public, and they have a loft where the old keeper would have lived. The new Presque light is maybe a mile away. It was built in 1870, still known as new, and this is the tallest publicly available light tower you're going to see on any of the Great Lakes. This had 130 steps to the top. And you could go out and walk that catwalk around the top of it once you got there. So that was fascinating. Obviously, that's how I got the shot on the right. And my wife and I were the only ones there at the time, so it wasn't crowded on the steps. It wasn't crowded up top. I had a blast. It's the 5th tallest on the Great Lakes. It's the tallest one you can get into. And there you have to know what you're getting into if you're going to try and go up the tower. But this has 2 museums, and there's a lot to see. On the same island, there is also a couple of range lights we'll see here coming up in a few minutes when we loop through all the lights. You may have seen these. If you've been to Cana Island, hopefully you also saw the Bailey Harbor range lights. They're at the Ridges, which is a nature preserve place. And I appreciated being able to get the shot on the left. It gives you that idea of what it would have looked like from shore, or I'm sorry, from water. So the captain would have wanted to line up the light in this light on the left in the foreground with the light from the tower in what looks like a schoolhouse there in the back. And that's how you came in. This is the original Bailey's Harbor Lighthouse. It was built in 1852. It's the 3rd oldest in Wisconsin. It still stands. It's on private ground. This was the only place I could stand and get a picture of it. There's only 4 of them with the birdcage lantern still standing. But this one didn't last long. They built the range lights and the Cana Island light because this one was not helping captains get in properly. There were still all kinds of shipwrecks. So it may have been pretty, but it was useless. Sturgeon Bay, we're back in Wisconsin. So this is the pier head light. Gorgeous, just gorgeous. And you can walk all the way out there if you want to. This was built at the beginning of the canal as the canal opened, so you could take the shortcut through the peninsula instead of having going all the way up around the tip. So it was helpful that way. And this was built in 1903. It had company, and they built another light, which if you turn around on the breakwater, you see the canal light. And that's pretty impressive. The coastal light was approved for construction in 1895. The tower is 78 foot tall. There's an 18-foot lantern room on top of it, so it's more than 100 feet high. You can visit, but that side is part of an active Coast Guard station. And the reason I took the picture in the upper right is that's the fence. On the pavement, they have public painted on one side of a yellow line and private on the other side. So you were walking from a parking lot and able to walk out to the pier head light, but you were not supposed to cross into the other area. And since they had weapons and stuff, I figured I would, should probably follow that guidance. It's certainly worth the drive out of Sturgeon Bay. At the other end of the natural part of Sturgeon Bay is this light, Sherwood Point. It is west of Sturgeon Bay on the east side of the body of water we call Green Bay. It's about 30 feet above the lake, which you can't see in this angle. This is private land. This is a vacation home that if you have family in the Coast Guard, they could actually get on a list to live here for some of their vacation. So there was a place that said no trespassing. There's the Foghorn building next to it, and obviously you can see the light. Here in Wisconsin, Raleigh's Point Lighthouse is another one of those Coast Guard vacation locations. And Point Beach State Park is adjacent to Raleigh's Point. That's how I was able to get this shot, because I'm on state park land, not on the private Coast Guard land. The history with this light is kind of interesting. It's 113 feet. It is the tallest land-based light on the Great Lakes. It was completely automated in 1979. It originally came together kind of as hand-me-downs because it was supposed to go up in Chicago. They never got around to building it, so they took the materials for the light and brought it up to Wisconsin way back when. It's north of Two Rivers, not too far north of Two Rivers. Talked about Lake Winnebago. Here's two of them on that lake. The Kimberly Point Light is in Kimberly, built by the Kimberly family of Kimberly-Clark fame. It was built in 1940 as a fully functioning light. They don't need it for navigation. And it was in a park also created by the Kimberly family. It's beautiful. The Fond du Lac Lighthouse is not even really an actual lighthouse, but the story was compelling and it looks like a lighthouse, and I went up and I have pictures, so that's why I tell the story, because you might like to go up there anyway. But during the Depression, one of the local lumbermen decided that he wanted to build something like this for the city, and he put unemployed men to work at the time building this at no cost to the taxpayers or to the city. And so it became the emblem of Fond du Lac, and it still means a lot to the city. They've had to restore it through the years, but that's the significance there. The fact that it was kind of their own WPA project back in 1932 is when that got underway. Port Washington, north of Milwaukee, that community has a couple of lights. You'll see the second one later. The St. Mary Light Station, this building was built there in 1859. The first light was in 1849, excuse me. It didn't last long. This one was built in 1859. It stopped being a lighthouse in the 1930s. They even took the lantern off the building. Then in 2000, an official visiting from Luxembourg was in the area, visited this community museum, which it had become, and offered to have built a lantern and walkway so it could look again like a lighthouse. And this was to honor U.S. servicemen who helped liberate Luxembourg during World War II. If you're not aware, I assume you might be aware, but on the off chance you aren't, that area of Wisconsin has a lot of people who are descended from folks who migrated to Wisconsin from Luxembourg. That's why there was a Luxembourg official in this area, and there is a pretty good presence of Luxembourgers, I guess we would say, in that area. But I found that very interesting because if this doesn't have the lantern on it, I'm not giving it the time of day anymore. I mean, it would have been interesting as a community museum, but it wouldn't have meant anything beyond that. Michigan City, Indiana. This is their second lighthouse. This was built in 1904. A lot of the catwalk was destroyed in a 1913 storm. In 1929, another 300 feet was destroyed by a storm. The Coast Guard no longer needed it after 2007. the city took ownership. And this was the first light I saw with a catwalk like this. And I mean, this angle alone just made me kind of fall in love with the place because it's fun to be able to take pictures that add some different looks. Back to Sol Choi. This is the one I showed you the interior of way back at the beginning. So this is Gulliver, Michigan. Sol Choi means only choice. French sailors said they thought this was the only safe harbor on the north side of Lake Michigan on what is now the UP. It was built in 1895. The last keepers left in 1972. So it was on duty a long time. It still has a light in it. And it also has a story to tell. And like a lot of things, you'll hear haunted stories. Well, this one has a haunted story. And the Historical Society founder who helped save the station believed it to be haunted. And here's her story of her smelling cigar smoke. It was often detected in the dwelling, believed to be evidence that keeper Joe Townsend never left the station. He passed away in the dwelling in 1910. He laid in state in the downstairs parlor until his relatives could gather. Now, his wife never let him smoke in the house. So the thought is he is smoking whenever he wants to now. There's your haunted tale. This brick lighthouse, stands at the White River where it enters Lake Michigan. And some of the communities in Michigan made their own little canals connecting their little lake to the big Lake Michigan because they knew that was the economic development of the day. Think about the millions of dollars we spend now on infrastructure for businesses. That's what they did then. This house began in 1875. It's very similar to some other lights I've seen around Lake Michigan. Very common design, two-story house. This one is open. They have local volunteers who keep it. And you can get in there. We were there on a day when it wasn't open. The light was deactivated in 1960. It became a museum 10 years later. You may have seen this one, the Holland Lighthouse, big red. It was actually on a U.S. stamp. 60 Dutch Calvinists came to the United States in 1846 seeking a new home and the ability to worship as they wanted. They landed in Western Michigan, in what is now Holland. They used their own labor to build a connection between Black Lake and Lake Michigan in 1859. That had to be hard work. The current identity really comes from some recovery work in 1956 when they sandblasted and painted it this color, and it's now known as Big Red. It is a ways out of town from Holland. We happen to be in Holland. Our son's wife is from Grand Rapids, which is not far away. And we happen to be there not too far after the peak of the tulip season. If you love tulips, you owe it to yourself to go to Holland, Michigan, if not the actual Holland, sometime for a trip. This is not downtown, but not a terribly long drive from it. So here we are at Big Sable. And this one has a story. It's too bad my wife isn't part of this because she could give you her version of the story. Lucky for you, you get the true version of the story, although hers is decidedly more fun. So the day we got to Big Sable, it was at the end of a trip. We were going to take the ferry back across to Manitowoc the next morning. And so we get there. It was the last of the lights I was shooting. It's in the state park. So we paid. And I asked the warden at the gate, I said, how far to the light? Am I able to get there? He said, well, you park in the parking lot and it's a 2-mile hike. Oh, great. A 2-mile hike now. Well, my wife would say it was completely dark by the time I returned. It was not dark. It was certainly duskish. But most of my walk, I couldn't see the thing. It wasn't until I got very, very close that it appeared above the dunes, which gave me a photo you'll see on the loop that I'm really fond of. This is a place you could volunteer at. There's a big house that goes with it. If you take the ferry, the Badger Express ferry from Manitowoc to Ludington, it's 9 miles north of Ludington, but you can see it from the ship, especially if you're able to be on deck that day. A couple other lights to talk about. Wind Point, you can see that lower left. We were talking about that earlier. The Milwaukee Pier Head is upper left. and the Milwaukee Breakwater light in the distance. When they built the breakwater light, they took the light out of the pier head light and moved it to the breakwater. Wind Point is close to the Wingspan House, if you're a Frank Lloyd Wright fan. I believe it's owned by the township. It is open on occasion, usually weekends. You can go up in it. They've got that big foghorn building. You can have access to the shore. It's right next to a golf course, and you've got a lot of nice land to kind of walk around and enjoy it. You can take a picnic. This is close to civilization. I'd say it's probably a 5-mile drive from the nearest north-south main highway. And the Algoma Pierhead, that was built in 1908, and it was added on to in 1932. They put it on that big base. Not long after the Peshtigo fire, Algoma was home to the largest commercial fishing fleet on Lake Michigan. History that, these cities rose and fall depending on commerce. So now we're to North Point in Milwaukee. This is the closest, most likely to be open, but check before you go, given the pandemic. You can get into the tower. It's on city parkland. This is the second North Point lighthouse. The first light didn't work. They replaced that in 1854, but then erosion of the bluffs put that out of business. They built this one in 1888 when the light turned on, and it fits in the neighborhood. It's a historic old home, stately homes. We've visited there a number of times. One time there was a wedding going on on the back side of it toward the lake. You can go up the tower. They have a nice museum. They have a decent gift shop. I want to say it was $8 to go up. It's worth the drive. I would check online to see if they're open. If they're not open, you can still get the outside experience, though, if you want. If you've been to Mackinac Island, you would have seen this from your ferry, the Round Rock Island Lighthouse. It was built in 1894 to show ships around the North Passage of the Straits. Decommissioned in the 1950s, almost destroyed completely by a 1972 storm, and then locals and Boy Scouts started cleaning and beginning to rebuild it. And it's right on that route into the harbor on Mackinac Island. And I was lucky when our ferry landed that morning, it would have been soupy as far as the fog, but the day brightened up and I was thrilled because of the color and the fact it looks like it's standing in water, depending on your viewpoint. I just love the view of it. This is the last one really with the story I'll tell you about. We should all have friends like Mr. Livingstone. When he died, he did what I'm sure your families would probably do. They built a 47-foot light tower made of fluted marble with his name engraved above the door, which was made out of bronze. So that's pretty good friends, right? He was a major businessman, by the way, and a big supporter of navigation around Detroit. You can find this on the north end of Belle Isle, right off Detroit. You're still in the United States. There's a bridge. It took me a while to find it because they were working on the roads on that island. You'd think you should be able to find something this big, but it did take a while. The North Manistee Pier Headlight, this was the only catwalk I got even with. The ladder was not blocked off. It said you could not walk on the walk, but I was able to stand level with the walk and get this photo, which is one of my favorites. I just like the way it scales. I'm a big Far Side fan, and I kind of can identify with the lightkeeper scrambling to get lights up to the tower before the ship comes in, right? And kind of like the William Livingstone Tower, this is the old Mackinac Point light. And just the timing was right. It was early evening, and I happened to be standing in the right place and notice I could capture the sun coming right through the lantern. So that's one of the things that gets me excited when it comes to these. So I've got this to show. Do you have any questions? And I'm just going to start this as we go.
I have a question, David.
Yes.
At the start, you talked about the website to go to to learn about these or, to learn about a tour? Can you repeat that?
It's Lighthouse Friends, all together, Lighthouse Friends, friends is plural, .com. And when you get there, they have a little drop down that lists every state in the United States that has lighthouses in it. So like
Okay.
Illinois has a handful, Minnesota has, I think it's 6. Uh, and then you can open up the map. It'll show you that map like what I showed you, or it'll show you just a grid of names. It includes former lighthouses that are no longer standing, as well as the current ones. They'll give you, I don't know how current it is, because it disappeared from the web for a week or two when I was busy blogging about all these lighthouses, and it came back up. So I would double check any travel information you see on there, but it'll give you a map. It'll tell you how to find the places, and it will give you more history than you ever dreamed of or wanted, probably. But that's been very helpful. I have a website, blog. I've been blogging for years, and at the end of this, actually, I think I went by it, so I'll bring it back up later. I've blogged about all these, and so you can see more pictures of them there if you're interested. I use some of the history that I read. That lighthouse there, that's a private home. The guy really wanted to have his own lighthouse.
Cool. Really pretty. So it sounds like you got, well, to back up a bit, when you spent your week in the lighthouse and volunteer, did you do that like as a vacation?
I'm sorry, what do it?
When you spent the week at the lighthouse, I forgot which one, but did you do that like as a vacation? I know you volunteered.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and Mission Point is far enough away, and because it's Tuesday to Tuesday, I took 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
And we went to a number of lights in Wisconsin, and then we wanted to be there the night before, because you're in Traverse City or you're not. It's not, the next closest place is a distance away as far as places with stuff. So, and we were told to be there no later than 12, but around 11. And we worked until the next week. And it turns out we were allowed to leave earlier the next Tuesday morning, because the next crew was in, or the manager wanted to kind of reorient the books or whatever they wanted to do. So we spent of our Tuesday to Tuesday, we had the following Monday was our day off, and we traveled the area. We went and saw other things, but we worked. The store was open 10 to 5. I started sweeping around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. There was a historic site next to our property where I had windows in there to clean. I usually clean the windows in there at night because we locked those doors. It was a cabin with beds and stuff set up and plexiglass and stuff around. So I cleaned that at night. But there were cigarette butts to clean up and the sand off the ladder or the stairs. And if you lived on a corner address and you had a very, very long sidewalks, it took a long time to sweep. It really did. And you couldn't open before 10. A lot of times we had people lined up. And we closed at 5, pretty much at the stroke at 5. And then we started the cleaning and the counting down again. Overnight, more sand would blow in. That's why I probably did more than I had to do, but I was taking it fairly seriously at that point.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So because you volunteered at that lighthouse for a week, did they charge you to stay there?
What they asked for is essentially a $200 gift.
Okay.
That we gave them ahead of time. That varies. There's some places you don't have to pay anything. Some places want you for 2 weeks. This was a 1 week. There was a lighthouse in Sault Ste. Marie that you could volunteer for a year.
Wow.
That's more than I'm ready to chew.
Yeah.
There's some that are weekends. Like I said, there's one in the Apostle Islands where they literally drop you off by boat and they pick you up a week later, and you're really shut off from the world. And we didn't want to be.
It's pretty remote there anyway.
Yep. That one right there, the South Manitou Light. If I can go back a second. That one right there, we saw that on our day off. I didn't expect to see it because that's 7 miles offshore, and I did
Wow.
not expect to be able to see it. But I was thrilled that I was.
One more question, because
Yeah,
I'm hogging your time. I'm
no,
sorry, I'm
that's fine. That's what
not
this is
giving
for.
anyone else a chance to talk. But Traverse City, I've never been there, but the Traverse City and the whole route that you guys did in Michigan, did you recommend that as a vacation? I mean, was that a lot of fun? You
It
gotta like,
was.
you gotta